Welcome back for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. One of the key issues in this federal election has been how to tackle climate change and the future of Canada's energy sector. Voters have made clear that they care about this topic, and parties have contrasting plans. Joining me to discuss is News Forum contributor and national commentator Danielle Smith. Thanks for returning to my program, Danielle.
My pleasure.
So what do you make of this campaign? How would you describe what's been talked about when it comes to climate change and the energy sector and how it's been featured in this campaign?
Well, it seems to me there's a lot of consensus among the political parties that something must be done to price CO2. And I know it was a big hit for Erin O'Toole to have to make that admission, but I think it really does demonstrate where the industry is at. The industry knows that something must be done on this front. And if we do end up pricing CO2, it creates a lot of opportunity because you can either look at a price as a cost or you can look at it as a source of income. And I think increasingly we're seeing that our energy sector is looking at CO2 as a feedstock, and they're looking at ways that they can monetize it. So I think that could potentially create a very positive change.
So unpack that for our audience a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I think perhaps what happened when Justin Trudeau announced that we were going to $170 in price for a carbon tax, what that does is it causes a business owner to say, am I going to sit here passively and just wait to be taxed $170 per ton? Or am I going to find some other way that this can be taken away to be put to some other use? So there's a couple of things that are occurring. One is that we've got carbon capture and storage. So we've got a huge geological opportunity in Alberta because we've been able to take so much oil and gas out of the ground from our reservoirs, but what comes out can also go down. You can also capture CO2 and put it right back underground. And it creates a bit of a circular economy, right, where if you take the idea that if you're going to produce and burn fossil fuels, if you can find a way to capture the CO2 and return it, you've actually created a virtuous circle. So I think that's the way a lot of our industry is thinking about that, is why they're looking for an investment tax credit to help build out carbon capture facilities and pipelines so that they can facilitate that. And it's going to be potentially a lot less expensive than paying $170 for a tax. There's also a huge potential opportunity on utilization, a whole variety of products that you can create by using CO2 as a feedstock, whether it's industrial minerals or cement or carbon nanoffiber or propylene or ethylenes. And so I think what has happened is there's been a major rethink in looking at CO2 and the potential to monetize it. And that changes the conversation altogether. It brings entrepreneurs in and innovation to solve the problem. And I think we're heading well down that track in Alberta.
We've had a couple of those entrepreneurs on this show actually talking about how they are going to be recycling the CO2 as part of their oil and gas company and making basically their company ESG compliant. So this is not a one-off. This is happening in the industry then.
Oh, completely it is. And I'm wondering if there is a recognition of this change that has happened, because I often feel like everyone looks at Alberta as being a laggard or resistant or in some way pushing back against what the national agenda is. And maybe there's some fairness in that, because we have seen political leaders. It's not just been Alberta, it's been Saskatchewan, it's been Ontario as well, fighting the imposition of a federal carbon tax. But I think now that we've got to the end of the line with the Supreme Court coming down with a decision that because there's consensus that this is an urgent issue, if the province doesn't act, the federal government is going to, I think that really recalibrated everybody's thinking around this. And I'm not sure if the politicians have caught up to the level of innovation that is now taking place in the energy sector. And the reason it's important is that if we don't have the politicians recognizing the progress being made, they could start taking policy actions that go in the wrong direction.
Right. That's an interesting comment, because I do get that sense that things are happening very quickly in the O&G sector and looking at ways to be more compliant, because the reality is the reality. So maybe the political discourse has to catch up to the reality on the ground. We're going to continue with this discussion. We're going to take a brief break right now, but Danielle Smith will return after that break. So please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with News Forum contributor and national commentator Danielle Smith. Danielle, this is more of a political question maybe, but I would love to get your point of view on this. Have there been any, in this election campaign, any regional messages to Alberta and Saskatchewan that have taken hold? Or has it basically been the national messaging that's washed over?
You know, it's been interesting to watch because I think what we saw in the last election, Ontario Premier Doug Ford became a bit of a punching bag and a proxy for why it is Canadians shouldn't vote for the Federal Conservative Party of Canada. At that time, that was under Andrew Scheer. I think everybody was very aware that that could have been the case this time around, that maybe not so much Doug Ford, but that Premier Jason Kenney, because he's dipped in popularity. I think, sadly, he is the least popular premier in the country right now. I think that there was some sense that they were going to try to use Jason Kenney as a proxy for the Conservative leader now, Erin O'Toole. And I think that there's certainly been some issues that have been tried to be advanced, but I don't believe that Jason Kenney has made himself available. I don't think he's risen to that bait. In fact, it seems like he's going in the direction of the national consensus, particularly on COVID, in order not to disrupt things for Erin O'Toole. But in some ways, that's a good thing on the energy front. I think that there is a pragmatism that can set in post-election if people don't get too dogmatic and locked into their positions. And one of the things that I like about the strategy is that I feel like, for instance, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, he's going to form the balance of power very likely in any case.
100%.
And I think that many have been trying to sort of pin him down to being really strident in what he will support and not support in this energy space. And I think in some ways it hasn't been successful. And that's actually positive. As long as you can keep the conversation going and the door open, then I think that that's good for Alberta and for the industry.
Nor has Jagmeet Singh, as far as I know anyway, discounted the idea of working with Conservatives if they have a plurality of seats. So that's a change from last time too.
It certainly is. And I wonder if part of what's going on there is that it's sort of fool me once, right? And fool me twice. There were a lot of things that I think that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had promised as a way of bringing over Green Party voters and NDP voters. I think specifically around the changes he had promised to make around the first past the post electoral system. And so now people are saying, well, if we didn't get what we thought we were getting when we voted for him last time, why would we do this again? So in point of fact, I must tell you, like, I think that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP could be a very good partner if Erin O'Toole does win the minority position, largely because a lot of the base of the NDP comes from the labor side, and a lot of 100%. Those high-paying jobs in the union movement are blue collar and resource sector jobs. And so what we've seen in Alberta with the former NDP Premier here, Rachel Notley, as well as in British Columbia with John Horgan, who comes from the mining side of the labor movement, is that there really is a pragmatism about trying to make sure that there are good, well-paying jobs in the resource sector. And so there is a potential that we can find some common cause, especially if everybody is in agreement about what to do to address greenhouse gas emissions.
And we've had Justin Trudeau in this campaign say that new investments in oil and gas are tough to do given his caps on emissions, which was basically an admission that his policies were sinking the oil and gas sector as it currently existed. So that's going to have an impact as well.
Well, it certainly will. I mean, I guess the way I look at it, I'm seeing a pragmatism even in the Liberals since they switched to Seamus O'Regan being the Natural Resources Minister and Jonathan Wilkinson being the Environment Minister. The messaging used to be that it was wind and solar and batteries and everything would be electrified and there'd be no role for literally anything else. Now we see it broadened out to talk about hydrogen. If I understand it, I think the Environment Minister drives a hydrogen vehicle, which is also an electric vehicles. Going to be a little bit different in the West than in the East about how people switch to zero emissions vehicles. But hydrogen has a huge opportunity for us to piggyback on our traditional industries. Same with the small scale modular nuclear power. I mean, we weren't even talking about that at the beginning of the Liberal mandate. Now it becomes part and parcel of the conversation. And once you have that kind of pragmatism, then I think any one of our energy industries is going to be able to capitalize on that. It doesn't mean the end of the energy sector. It means that they can be the lowest emissions producer of hydrocarbons potentially in the world. And I think that's something that we can all embrace nationally, as long as we can get out of this election.
Well, we are going to go to a commercial break first before the election. We'll be back with Danielle Smith. Danielle, you mentioned Premier Jason Kenney. I want to return to him just for a moment because traditionally the Alberta Premier has been the voice of Alberta on federal provincial issues, on kind of explaining Alberta to the rest of the country. Jason, as you mentioned, has been very busy on the COVID front these days. Is there a voice for Alberta right now, in your estimation?
Not in the middle of this election campaign. I think that the lower the profile the Alberta Premier takes, the better. In the future, I mean, one of the things that I think is going to be increasingly important is that we've got to find a way for Alberta and Quebec to talk to each other. Maybe maybe we need to do a worker exchange where we can send our geologists and geoscientists to go work in the hydro industry, and then we can get some engineers from the hydroelectric industry to come and work in our sector here. But there needs to be, I think, a better understanding about how different the two economies are and how different the base of energy power is in both of the jurisdictions. I think I get the sense that there isn't a lot of communication between the two provinces, or a lot of recognition that they're going to require vastly different solutions in both parts of the country. And if we could figure out a way to get Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia and Alberta all on side, the four major economic generators of the entire country, then I think we can move forward with unity, and we can move forward with trying to tackle the $600 billion COVID debt that has been rung up. But the sad part is that there seems to be so much division and so much finger pointing. And sadly, you would think that elections could be a time where you would talk about unity. Unfortunately, it's turned into a time where you've got political parties finding ways to differentiate against each other. And sometimes that means that Alberta becomes the target. So yes, one day, again, the Alberta Premier will be able to take that lead. But I think we got to wait till the election's over.
Yeah, there's a lot of anger out there. There's no question about it. And some of it, I mean, I want to get your sense of some of these other parties too. The Maverick Party, the People's Party of Canada, of course, running candidates in Alberta for sure. And overlaying all that is this upcoming Alberta referendum on equalization, which will take place in October. So can you tie that into a theme? What's going on out there?
I didn't really take the Maverick Party or the People's Party that seriously until I went to, just in the last week, I did go up to Northern Alberta and saw the kind of crowds that Maxime Bernier with the People's Party was getting out. It's kind of bananas. I mean, in the Edmonton area, which is traditionally seen as an NDP stronghold, he was getting over 1,000 people out to his rallies, packed rooms full of people as well. So it could well be that if you look at the poll results, that he may end up being a spoiler. Spoiler for who? I'm not quite sure yet, because he seems to draw from all of the political parties.
Well, that's it. People assume in the kind of the pundit class that it's all CPC voters. I'm not quite sure that's the case.
I don't know that it is either. I mean, one of the women who came out to a rally was somebody who was a young mother, sort of from a yoga instructor, homeschooled her kids, but she's kind of in sort of the clean living, organic farm kind of movement. And so somebody who's of that view is apparently quite attracted to Maxime Bernier's hard line that he's taking against mandatory vaccination. Who would have known that would have been an element? But she certainly would not have been a traditional conservative voter. The Maxime Bernier also might have taken a bit of the oxygen in Alberta out of the Maverick movement, because initially the Mavericks looked like they were going to be the party that was able to take advantage of some of the anger that Albertans have at how they've been treated in Confederation. But because he's been able to capitalize on that, I'm not sure that there'll be a breakthrough for the Mavericks either. The question would be, does that end up pulling enough away from the Conservatives that they lose seats in Alberta? Because the Conservatives can't afford to lose any seats where they currently have it, especially since they've got to gain so much ground, particularly in Ontario.
Well, can they lose seats in Alberta? Is that something you're predicting?
There's a potential for sure. I mean, we already have an NDP seat in Edmonton, which overlaps with that of our former Premier Rachel Notley at the provincial level. So I suspect that'll stay NDP. But familiar face is running once again, who used to have a seat in Edmonton. He's running in the same seat again. His name is Randy Boissonneau, so you might want to look at that one. And then in Calgary, another very popular council member who seemed to attract support from all sides. He even had one of the more conservative council members running for mayor come out to support him just because he's such a good guy. He has a real potential to win back a seat that the Liberals won in the last round as well. So when I look at the poll results, I think they're suggesting on 338 Canada, there could be 2 seats that end up going back to the Liberals in Alberta. And that would mean that Erin O'Toole has some work to do to make up for that in other parts of the country.
And we're back here at Boom Bust, and I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with News Forum contributor and national commentator Danielle Smith. Danielle, obviously, we are just before the election when we're taping this, and there will be a post-election. So what needs to be done in the energy sector, in your view, post-election?
I think what needs to happen is a recognition that we are not going to see our energy workers transition into installing solar panels. That makes no sense. There just isn't the amount of overlap in the skill sets for that to be a practical solution. There aren't enough high-paying jobs. And quite frankly, I don't know why we would want to be embracing the crystalline silicon panels being made in China with coal power as somehow being more environmentally friendly. So I think that there has to be a little bit of a shakeup in understanding that we need to have every sector of the economy performing at top capacity if we're going to address some of the issues that we face at the national level. How are we going to get back into balanced budget? How are we going to pay for anybody's big spending plans? You can't do that without the energy sector. And so understanding that Alberta wants to be constructive and understanding that Alberta has the ability to be the center of the hydrogen economy with our natural gas, that we can reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by having a robust export of LNG off both of our coasts so that replaces coal, so that we can also adopt nuclear so that we can, at our large oil sands plants, be able to reduce the energy input in developing out our bitumen. Because regardless, if you're going to have an electric vehicle that is powered by hydroelectricity, or an electric vehicle powered by hydrogen, it's still going to need asphalt in order to drive on, and that comes from bitumen. We're going to need to continue to have a robust petrochemicals industry. I know that the Prime Minister recently made the decision to label plastics toxic. But for heck's sake, we've been using plastic syringes and plastic gloves and plastic masks for the last year and a half.
Than ever. Yeah, exactly.
Completely. And so we have to have some understanding that the things that we need to have a good quality of life, that we can find ways to mitigate the environmental costs associated with it. We don't have to start phasing things out. And I'm hoping that sense of reality kicks in post-election.
I mean, it's really, and I'm a big believer that in an election you should talk about important issues, but at the same time in this election, for obvious political reasons, things have become a caricature, whether it's anti-vax or whether it's the abortion debate or whether it's gun owners. So really, what you're saying though is at some point we do need to have an adult conversation about our energy sector, what it can do, what it shouldn't be doing anymore. And that's a kind of a nuanced conversation in your estimation.
Oh, it completely is. I wonder if you share sort of the same lament that I do, is that I got involved in politics in the 90s, and there used to be a lot of overlap between some of the types of folks who would run for the Liberals. They used to be called blue Liberals, and there used to be some red Tories, and there used to be some ability to find some common ground. I mean, even when you were in government, you looked at a person like David Emerson, who
100%.
absolutely was the best person on the Liberal benches to see us through the softwood lumber dispute. And so, of course, Stephen Harper made the decision to recruit him over onto the Conservative side. It just made good sense to do that. And that, I think, is something that we're missing from politics now. Everybody's getting polarized into their tribe, and there doesn't seem to be that meeting across the aisle. And we need so much more of that. To stitch the country back together. Because you'd also mentioned we're about to have in Alberta a referendum on equalization. And I don't know necessarily that Albertans want to take a hard line of saying what's ours is ours and the rest of you to heck with it. But I think people are getting really frustrated that Quebec stands in the way of us being able to achieve our full economic value on the full range of resources, and at the same time continues to get a huge amount of additional transfers coming from the federal government. So that I think is something that we have to repair, and we only repair it with a sense of goodwill, with everybody being able to contribute with the resources that they have to the full extent of their ability, and then we can fight over afterwards how we're going to spend the money that gets generated. But we got to generate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of goodwill, mine is gone. My time is up for this program. Danielle Smith, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really important discussion with Danielle Smith on the energy sector, climate change, and how to tackle these important economic and political issues. Let's hope we'll have an opportunity to do that, if not before the election, then certainly after. Thanks for watching.